Hey Brian, let's take a look at your week 2 assignment 3 drawing here. So I think as we take a look at kind of some of the things that were happening in this assignment and some of the things that are happening in this assignment, there is a certain, I think, amount of kind of cleanliness and refinement to some of the elements, especially as we look kind of at the background. Things tend to have been cleaned up since we saw in the last one. Color pencil usage is much more limited, and so we're definitely not seeing kind of an overuse of it in the drawing and in odd kind of areas of it, as well. It seems like it's being limited to certain parts of objects, which is good. I do think that the objects themselves have a little bit more work to be done on them, and I think your technique still needs a little bit more refinement. You need to still work on some of your edging, because we're seeing a lot of kind of areas that are seeing some slippages. And I think texturally we need to see a little bit more specificity. There are any of the gray textures, I'm not exactly sure what kind of texture we're going for, whether it's stone, whether it's metal. I don't really know what the sphere is kind of going for either. So there's, I think, some kind of questions with that. I think lighting situation wise, it's good, it's consistent, although I think it could be pushed a little bit more. You could definitely have kind of a darker value for some of these elements, and where you do have kind of the shadowed part as it kind of makes its turn, things could get darker on all fronts. This could be darker, this kind of area could be darker, this could be darker. This one's actually working out fairly well with that in mind. So that could be pushed a little bit further, and I think cast shadows could be a little bit darker as well, so that they were just a bit more concrete. I think this was good, to a certain extent, because they felt fairly solid and they started to dissipate, which you have a little bit of, but could be pushed further. Texturally, I think for me is kind of the big thing. I just think that we need to see a little bit more in terms of what makes a certain texture, specifically that texture. If it's a metallic texture, I think you have to have very clear indications that there's reflection or a shiny surface, reflective surface. So that usually incurs very, very sharp highlights, quick changes from the highlight to the shadow tone. So in the case of, we can take a look at someone's here where we can see the highlight and it moves very quickly into a middle tone, and then it kind of makes changes from middles to dark middles, and there's a few highlights here and there, but nothing it makes the progression from lighter to darker, but it does so in a very kind of quick way from one to the next. Also, a little bit of introduction of color from some of the elements around it can really help to make it feel more, more realistic and more reflective. So maybe some of this yellow, getting a little bit of that in place, getting a little bit of red from the ground plane down below could be helpful. In terms of a stone texture, I just think you need to do more to get a stone texture to stand out. I'm not sure if this is a stone texture or a metal texture, and so some of the grittiness, some of the kind of mark making that you can do, some of the random stuff that you can do to make it feel like a stone texture could really help that along. I think you might actually have some of it here, but it needs to be brought forth a little bit more. The wood texture feels good. The brick texture feels pretty good, although you have to make sure that the bricks are aligning with the perspective, which they're not quite doing on this side. And then I think there's the technique where we're just seeing a lot of these issues where you have very unclear edges, you have color that's kind of breaking beyond the bound of the drawing itself, and I think a little bit more care and refinement in some of the detail work that needs to be done, especially the cast shadows. We could see, I think, a little bit more careful application, more purposeful application. I'd also like to see just a little bit more color application. It feels a little bit limited at this point, where we have gray, red, and then the one yellow, and being able to see a little bit more in place can be helpful in terms of visual interest, but it is a little bit limited at this point. And so being able to have some materials that you can introduce more color to, especially the stone, where you don't want to just leave them gray, but you want to have a little bit more organic color in place, is going to help with the drawing overall.